Okay, good evening. My name is David Cashman. I work with SEB Housing in Needham, and this is the information session for the affordable units at Halyard on 4 Schoolhouse Road in Gloucester. Tonight we'll go through some of the relevant information about what this opportunity is and how you can apply going forward. Ultimately, this evening is for anyone watching for their benefit. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, and I will address them. If it's something super specific to you, I may ask you to hold off until after I get through some of the details that I want to cover. If it's something more general that I think could be applicable to other viewers, I'll try and answer it when it's asked. One thing, if you haven't already, this opportunity is, you can read a little bit more about it and access the information packet and the application on our website, which is www.sebhousing.com. And Halyard itself also has their own website. Again, just to recall, SEB Housing is not the ownership group, and we're not the property manager. We're an offsite consultant. So we have a website, and definitely encourage you to visit there for easy access to a little bit more reading about this property and easy access to a downloadable application and information packet. And also, if you haven't already, take a look at Halyard's website. You can see photos of this beautiful brand new building. You can look at some floor plans, I think, and read just a little bit more about this beautiful brand new project. Okay, so these are affordable units, and in total, this development is going to have 200 rental units. And of those 200 units, 30 of them are going to be set aside as affordable to households who are making up to 80% of the area median income. Now, those 30 units will be available in a mix of bedroom sizes. There will be 2 studio affordable units, 12 one-bedroom affordable units, and 16 two-bedroom affordable units. Now, these 30 units have all been approved by both the city and the state, and they've been approved to make sure that they're equitable and that they're scattered throughout the development, and that they're not sort of wise identifiable as affordable units to someone who's just walking down the hallway. So they're on different floors, facing different sides of the buildings. They're not all scattered or siloed one on top of each other. There's a nice even distribution of affordable units, which has been pre-approved by both the city and the state. And the affordable units, I said, are affordable to households making up to 80% of the area median income. Now, you don't necessarily need to know exactly what that means for purposes of moving forward, but just for your own edification, if you're interested, kind of what that figure is and where that comes from. It publishes area median incomes every year in the spring for various geographies all throughout the country. And I don't know exactly how they get their numbers, probably pretty sophisticated methodology with lots of inputs, but they basically crunch their numbers and they say, for this geographic area, on average, a household of size of 1 makes, X amount, and a household of size of 1 making 80% of area median income makes X amount, and a household size of 2 making 80% of area median income makes this amount, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit about what those specific income limits are. But that's who this opportunity is geared towards. You have to be under the income limits to be eligible. And the rents are on account of the fact that this opportunity and these 30 units are available to households who income qualify. Probably doesn't come as a surprise that the rents will be less than what they are on the market rate. sometimes by a substantial amount. So, okay, here's the first question from Anna. People with Section 8, do they accept? So the answer to that question, Anna, is yes. If you have a Section 8 voucher, you are not barred from using that in this program. You can move forward and apply with a Section 8 voucher. And probably the biggest thing for anyone with a voucher is just to make sure that the issuing authority, often a housing authority, will allow you to use it at this property. And in making that assessment, they'll probably just be looking at the rents and trying to make sure that the rents are below the fair market rents and that they're reasonable. And in this case, I'm pretty sure that they are, but you're going to want to check with your housing authority to make sure. But provided you meet the other requirements of eligibility, then yes, you can use, there's no rule that would say you can't use a voucher, Section 8 or otherwise, in this program. But that's an interesting question because that segues into my next point that I was going to make, which is just generally that even though these are affordable units, they're not subsidized units. Like I said, you can use a voucher, but otherwise the general expectation is that households will be able to move forward and pay the rent on the strength of their own income. So let's just talk for a second about what the rents are. So there's 2 studio units, and the rents for those will be $1,591 a month. There are 12 one-bedroom units. The rent for those are $1,806 per month, and 16 two-bedroom units that will be renting for $2,008 a month. You don't have to memorize that. That information is in the information packet and the ad and the application. So you can find it easily in any of those places. Those rents, I should note, do not include the cost of gas, heating and hot water, or gas at this property. They also do not cover electricity, which includes cooking. But water and sewer costs are included in the rent, as is 1 free parking space. And pets are allowed at this property. One additional note about rents is that because rents are determined according to a formula that factors in households' area median incomes, what that means for you is that those rents are those rents, and they don't change based on any particular household's financial picture. So there isn't, maybe with some other affordable housing programs, rents may be more specifically tied to a household's income and asset picture. In this program, the rents are the rents. They're tied to numbers published by HUD, and they don't change based on any particular applicant's financial situation. So, okay, that's kind of in a nutshell, just a little bit about, how many units there are and just a little bit of background about what this opportunity is. I want to talk a little bit and just kind of frame the discussion going forward. I think it's probably easiest to think about this as a 2-step process. The first step is going to be to assess whether or not you think you're interested and maybe eligible. And we'll talk about the eligibility requirements and then the application and finally the lottery for households who qualify. And then the second step is applying for a lease with the leasing office. Okay, and again, the leasing office is not SEB Housing. We work with them. We'll be working with them a lot, but we are 2 separate entities, and we do, we're working together, but we do different things. So let's kind of start digging in on this kind of first step, which I mentioned, which is what are the eligibility requirements? Who can apply and move forward for this opportunity for these 30 affordable units? Well, the first eligibility requirement is that households have to have income and assets that qualify according to the program rules. The second is that priority established through the lottery will be for the larger units will be given to households who need the larger bedroom sizes. That one isn't so much an eligibility criteria, but it is an important criteria for you to understand and how priority will be given through the lottery. Households cannot own a home upon move-in. You can own a home now, but the home would have, or you could sign a lease. So if this is something you're interested in pursuing and you do own a home now, you would maybe want to think about making preparations for how you were going to sell that home. Finally, households and people in their family cannot have a financial interest in the development or be considered a related party. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one. I'm going to circle back around on the previous three that I mentioned. This one does not come up a ton. It does from time to time. Most often, if someone is related to the developer or the management team in this case is Dolben. So if you know that you are related to someone who is involved in this project, that's something that you would need to disclose on your application. And depending on who that connection is to and what it is, then you could be disqualified based on being a related party. But that's something that you would need to disclose in your application, and we could review it at that time. And I should also note that of the 30 affordable units, some of them will be built out for persons with some of them will be disabled accessible, so built out for persons with mobility impairments. And also one of the units has features for persons who are hearing impaired. Applicants who need the features of those units will be given priority for those units as contrasted with households who do not need the features. So let me go back and just kind of dig in a little more on the first eligibility requirement, which is that households must have income and assets that qualify per the program. The income limits are broken down by household size. I'm going to list through them right now, but again, these are listed in various places in the information packet, in the application, and the ads, so you don't need to write this down or try and memorize it. Just take a look at those materials and they'll be right there. So for a household size of 1, the income limit is $67,400. The household size of 2, the income limit is $77,000. For a household size of 3, the income limit is $86,650. And for a household size of 4, the income limit is $96,250. So unlike the rents, which are just tied to the bedroom, studio rents for this, or 1-bedroom rents for that, and the 2-bedroom rents for what it rents for, your eligibility based on income limits will depend on how many people you're applying for. So you need to figure out how many people are you trying to move forward with, and then depending on what your household size is, you just find the income limit that applies to a household of that size. Now, income is gross income, okay? It's not after-tax net income. It is your gross income, with the exception that if you are self-employed, then it is your net income. And for households who are self-employed, you will see that there's an entire section in the application and forms, including profit and loss statements at the back of the application that you'll need to fill out, demonstrating and indicating what your income is. And those forms are, month by month, and it requests that you list, your revenue sources and what the cost of sales are and what your expenses are. And then from there, you get your total expenses, and you take that out from your revenue and you get your net income. Okay. So if you are self-employed, you will need to complete one of the profit and loss statements at the back of the application, possibly several, depending on your circumstances. And there are instructions in the back that tell you, how many you're going to have to complete. You'll definitely have to do one for this year. You may have to do one for last year, and you possibly, if there are anticipated changes, you may have to do one for a future year. But you'll definitely have to do one for this year and list out some of those specifics about revenue and also the cost of sale and expenses, and you'll have to provide supporting documentation. Okay, but for other employees and people who aren't self-employed, income is your gross income, your pre-tax income, what shows up on your pay stubs, and it includes all household members with the exception of minors and with the exception of full-time students who are dependents. We only count up to $480 of their income towards the income limit. So if you have a 16-year-old kid that's going to be applying with you, they may have income, but from a job, we're not counting that. If it's a different source of income, like they're getting monthly distributions from a trust or something like that, that's different. But from employment, we don't count minors' income from employment towards the income limit. Similarly, if you have a dependent who's a full-time student and they have a job, let's just say for sake of an example, they work on the side while they're going to school and they make $8,000 in a year, that's great. We would only count $480 of that. I don't actually know exactly where that number comes from, but that's the program rule. And so that's what we would add into your income and any other household members to determine the gross income limits. Income is, as you'll see in the application, pretty broad. Okay, income for this program is counted more broadly than maybe it is in other places, and is maybe more broad than what most people tend to think of when they think of income. Probably the most common thing people think of is what do they make from their job, and that certainly counts. But there are other sources of income as well, because maybe a household has a full-time job, but they also work a little bit on the side. Whatever that side work may be, well, that also counts as income. If you're self-employed, if you're driving Uber, Lyft, doing something in the gig economy, selling stuff regularly on eBay through a business, that's all income. That's all got to be counted. If you're receiving child support or alimony or workman's compensation or Social Security, or you have a pension where you're getting regular distributions, or another one that comes up sometimes is people are getting periodic payments from a friend or a loved one or a family member. That's great for you if you have that, but the program requires that we count that as income. So, if someone in your life is sending you $500 a month, or $200 every 2 weeks, and it's regular, and we see a pattern of it in the documents that you submit, we're required to count that as income. I know a lot of people, that's not, what they're sort of, may not be the first thing that comes to their mind when they think of income, but that does count. So I think, everyone's income picture is different. And I think the best thing, kind of takeaway you can have from tonight is spend time when you fill out the application on the income table. We list a lot of different sources of income that come up as based on our experience in this program, and so take your time going through it. If it doesn't apply to you, just check off not applicable. But going through this and spending a proper amount of time on it will help make sure that you don't overlook something, an income source, and not count it, and then later maybe shows up in your bank statements, and then we have to ask questions, and we have to be the ones in the unfortunate position of saying, well, you only disclosed a certain amount of income, but you forgot to mention this other one. So spend some time on that, and just make sure that you try and count all of them, all your income sources when you're filling out the application. Now, so there's maximum income limits depending on the number of people in your household that you're going to apply with. And we have to review your...
Families to move in?
I'm sorry?
No. My father had a question for me.
Okay. So there's no minimum income limits in this program. However, it is the expectation that households will be able to afford the rent on the strength of their own income. Now, none of this applies if you have a voucher. If you have a voucher, you can disregard what I'm saying and what I'm about to say about minimum income. But if you don't have a voucher and you're going to be paying rent yourself, then please pay attention to this. So the leasing office, because like any leasing office, they want to rent to people who are going to be able to afford the rent, and they don't want to have you sign a lease and months later you're not able to afford the rent. That's not fun for anyone. They do a rent income screening, and they do this for market rate applicants as well who apply. And their criteria are that a household has to make approximately 2.5 times the monthly rent in income to qualify. So what that means is that for a studio, a household would have to make a little under $50,000 a year to demonstrate to the leasing office that they're going to be able to afford the rent. And for a one-bedroom, a household would have to demonstrate that they make a little over $56,000 a year to demonstrate that they qualify. And for a two-bedroom, a household would have to show that they make just a little under $64,000 a year to show that they qualify. We list these in the information packet in a section in big bold called minimum income and assets. So again, like the income limits, you don't have to write it down or try and memorize it. Just take a look at the info pack, which hopefully you're going to do anyway, because it's definitely advisable to take a look through there. There's a lot of important information. And when you do, you can take a look at the section on minimum income and assets, and you'll see what those numbers are. Now, that we will factor in your assets when we are looking at minimum income. So, for example, I had said that in order to meet the leasing office's criteria for a studio, a household would have to make a little under $50,000 a year. Well, if you only make $40,000 a year, but you have $40,000 in the bank, that's going to be good enough for SEB housing because we'll consider your assets. And as this isn't a program criteria, it's a leasing office criteria, our position is, hey, if it's close, if it looks like you may meet this criteria, we're not going to be the ones to tell you no. Ultimately, when you move on in step 2 and apply for a lease, if you do move on in step 2, then the leasing office is going to be the one to really kind of implement this and take a look and figure out if you meet their criteria. But for SEB housing's purposes, when you submit a lottery application, if you're close to the minimum income and assets criteria, we're not going to screen you out if you're just a little bit under. Okay. Assets. Assets like income, there are various sources of assets, and we have an asset table in the application. Similar to income, I would recommend that you spend some time and just go through that carefully to make sure you list what your different assets are. They're, like income, they're sort of the ones that probably pop first to many people's minds. Like if you have a checking account or a saving account, then those certainly count. But people could have other types of assets too, like a retirement account or mutual funds or an investment property or what have you, trust account. And those also need to be disclosed. But the thing about assets is there's no asset limit. So you could actually have quite a bit in assets, and that wouldn't disqualify you from this program. But perhaps, yep.
How about life insurance policies? Are those count as assets?
So I'm just going to repeat the question for the people who are watching online. So the question is about life insurance policies. And that, that's a good question. I think that would count. But I can circle back with you after and try and get you an answer for sure. That's not one that I'm asked frequently. I'd have to ask one of our application processors. I think it would count. Perhaps more importantly, though, I was going to say there's no asset limit. Most life insurance policies, or a lot of life insurance policies, are probably over 75, there can be a substantial amount that would be awarded in the event of a death. But there's no asset limit. So even if you had $1 million policy, that doesn't put you over any limit. And so whether it counts as an asset or not may not really matter that much, if you follow, because there is no asset limit. What is relevant about assets is if they generate income, because any income that an asset generates gets added towards the income limit. But there isn't an asset maximum, and so you could have a life insurance policy or some other type of asset with quite a big figure attached to it, and that is not going to bump you over any limit or disqualify you. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. And then Lori followed up just on the YouTube here. I think it counts based on if you can borrow on the policy. And I'll be perfectly honest, Lori, and to the caller, I don't know. I'd have to ask one of our application processors about life insurance. My gut says that it probably does count. But again, there's no asset limit. So I'm not sure that it's of too much importance unless it's generating a whole bunch of income for you that bumps you over the income limit. Okay. There is a related question to that, Lori, that does come up a lot about people ask about their retirement funds, and they tend not to think of those as assets because, if you're under a certain age, you're probably not thinking about touching that money for a long time, and we don't sort of think of it as an asset. But in that case, that does get counted, and you would have to include the post penalty amount, and you get a letter from the administrator of the program to say, so and so has let's just say $100,000 in the retirement fund, and if they were to withdraw it today, there'd be a penalty of $20,000, and the net cash value would be $80,000. Again, that's an asset. We would count the net cash value amount, but there's no asset limit. So that's not bumping you over a relevant asset threshold. One thing I do want to say also is that there's no guarantors or co-signers in this program. So if there's anyone watching this and thinking, I'm going to have a mom or dad or loved one, my credit's a little weak, but I think I otherwise qualify, but, leasing office, maybe they'll approve me if mom or dad or whomever is on the lease or a guarantor for me. For better or worse, this program doesn't allow that. Okay, so you ultimately would have to qualify with the leasing office yourself without the benefit of a guarantor or a co-signer or the like. Okay. Another question that comes up with some frequency, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. People will ask, do you have to be a resident of the city of Gloucester to apply? Absolutely not. There are some priorities for some of the units that apply to residents of Gloucester, but being a resident is absolutely not a requirement. So, okay, that's kind of as much as I'm going to say about income and assets. There's plenty more that could be said, but it's very individualized, and those questions are probably best raised once you start to look through the application, and once you submit an application. If you do, you can get into the nitty-gritty with my team when you submit an application. And you can always reach out to us if you're filling out an application and you have questions about any of it. So let's move on to kind of the second point about eligibility. I mentioned that for some of the units, there will be priority based on household size. Again, this isn't so much a program eligibility criteria, but it is an important thing that determines how some of the bigger units, where the priorities will be. And so it's just important for households to understand this when they're filling out their application and trying to have an eye towards what will happen when we run the lottery. When you fill out your application, one of the very first questions is going to ask you what household type you are, and you can either be a type 2 or a type 1 household. And essentially what that means is the program says that type 2 households need 2 bedrooms. They could also, be fine in a 1-bedroom or a studio, but they are appropriately sized for a 2-bedroom. So that would include like a 4-person household or a 3-person household, and or a parent and child, or in some circumstances there's 2 people living together, but they can't share a bedroom. This doesn't come up so often, but the program would say, just as an example, that if you're applying as a 3-person household, you're a type 2, you're appropriately sized for 2 bedrooms, i.e. you need 2 bedrooms per the program. And you get priority for a 2-bedroom unit, as compared to a type 1 household, which includes generally 2 heads of household. So like a married couple would be example, or a 1-person household. So there isn't a whole lot that needs to be kind of said on, or a whole lot of explanation there when you fill out your application. On the question about household type, just find, how many people you're going to be applying with, check off the box, that's your household type. But the relevance is the importance of that, if you're kind of wondering why that question is being asked, is just to understand that later on when we do the lottery, that for the 2-bedroom units, type 2 households will get priority for those as contrasted with type 1 households. When you submit, if and when you submit a lottery application, and I recommend, the deadline is in February. It's February 12th, so coming up in about a month. I recommend trying to get your application in earlier rather than later. I'm not necessarily saying to submit something that is totally inadequate and incomplete, but if it's pretty close and you feel pretty good about it, submit it to us. Even if you think there might be some things missing or you have some uncertainties, go ahead and send it in, because most households do not submit a totally complete, perfect application on the first try. And in fact, many households have to submit it and resubmit it a couple of times before it's totally complete. And that's just kind of owing to the fact that there's a lot of documentation that's required. Submitting an application for a lottery is a lot like applying for a mortgage, and the bank wants to see a lot of proof of what your income and assets are, and everything's got to be kind of explained. We're not allowed to just take applicant statements on faith. We need to see the documents that show what your income is and show what your assets are. So there's a lot there, and try as households may, a lot of times there's some things that get missed. So there's that. And there's also, even for the households that are incredibly thorough and they submit absolutely everything that's requested by the application, sometimes the things that you request actually elicit or require further questions from us. And so then you actually have to go and get a little bit more documentation. So just as an example of that, one thing that kind of comes up with some frequency is, maybe you submit the bank statements for your checking and savings account, and you submit the required number, and that's great. You think you've checked off that box, but in looking through those, we see that there are all these deposits into your checking account that aren't attributable to your job that you told us about, or some other income source that you told us about. And so then we have to ask, well, hey, Joe applicant, it looks like twice a month you get deposits of $250 that's not from your job, and we can't tie it to anything else. We need documentation of what that money is and where it's coming from. So anyway, point is, because of that, I recommend that if you're interested in this opportunity, get that application in earlier rather than later. Once you submit it, SCB Housing will usually get back to you in 2 to 4 days, depending on how busy we are, and we'll let you know exactly the status of things. For many households on the first try, it's going to be a thanks for submitting it. It's still incomplete. Here's what's missing. And we'll list out those items in detail so that you can track them down and resubmit them to us. If you're ineligible, we'll let you know that you're ineligible and the reasons why. And if you think we've made a mistake, we can re-review it. And if you're eligible, we'll let you know that too. But I guess the point is that this process can take a couple submissions. You don't want to be scrambling at the 11th hour to try and get everything. So give yourself a little bit of cushion, get it in early. We'll work with you. It doesn't matter if you have to try 2, 3, 4 times. That's okay. We want to get you through the process, and it definitely is easiest for you if you give yourself some time to do that. If you are eligible, we'll send you a lottery application number and notice. The application number will be in the form of A blank, 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 and it'll have a number attached to it. And that number is simply the order in which we received your complete lottery application. It doesn't have any bearing on where you are in the lottery or how you'll move forward. It's just an anonymous identifier to be used in the lottery. And in that lottery application number and letter will also include some other information about your lottery application. You're going to want to take a moment and read through that letter carefully to make sure everything's right, because that's what we'll be using in the lottery. So make sure that the household members that we list on there are the household members that you put on your application and who you intend to move forward with, and that we put on the correct bedroom sizes that you applied for. And if we said something about whether you had local preference or not, make sure that's correct. And your household type, make sure that's correct. So this is not an overly long document. It's about a little less than a page and a half. Probably take you just 2 minutes or something to look over it, but look over your lottery application number letter if you're eligible, and just make sure that the info we have in there is accurate, because that's what we'll be using when we run the lottery. If we don't find out about an oversight or a mistake or something until later, it can take a lot more work to fix it after the fact. So the lottery will be on February 25th, and it'll be just like we're doing here. So it'll still be virtual. These lotteries are different than what most people think of when they think of lotteries, when they think of winners and losers. And, some people win the lottery and some people lose, and that's too bad. That's not really the right way to think about these lotteries, because in these affordable housing lotteries, everyone gets entered. Okay, so if you submit an application, you'll be in the lottery, your number will get picked, and everyone will have a position on a waiting list that they're eligible for. So let me just say something about that too. When you apply, you can apply for multiple bedroom sizes. So you're not restricted to just pick one, your most preferred. You could apply for all 3, and there's honestly no downside at all to doing so. And I highly recommend that if you think you could be eligible, interested in all 3, then apply for all 3. You may not be eligible for all 3, but that's okay. We'll let you know. Maybe you'll be eligible for 2 of them and not the other. Whatever the case may be. There's no downside to applying for more, but there can be a downside to restricting or limiting yourself to just one size, because then we can't, when we do the lottery, you're not going to be on the bedroom size waiting list that you didn't apply for, and we can't sort of just fix that after the fact. So again, be over-inclusive. You can pick as many bedroom sizes as you want on your lottery application number, and that's not going to, prejudice you or be detrimental to you at all. Better to include more than not. And so if you do apply for multiple, let's just say you're someone says, I'm going to apply for all 3. I think I could be happy for all 3, or in any bedroom size that's available. And let's say you're eligible for all 3. That's great. Then that means that when we run the lottery and we do the drawing, you're going to be on 3 different waiting lists, because you were eligible for the studios, you were eligible for the 1 bedrooms, and you were eligible for the 2 bedrooms. And there will be separate waiting lists for the different bedroom sizes. So, and those waiting lists will be broken down by the different priorities that we have to give. So just as an example, and there's going to be a number of different waiting lists, and it'll take too much time to kind of go through them in detail right now, but they are listed on page 12 of the information packet if you're kind of curious. You don't necessarily need to worry about that at this point or at all, but if you're just sort of curious how the waiting list will be made, you can take a look at page 12 of the information packet. The point is, there'll be several different waiting lists. They'll be broken down by different bedroom sizes and by different priorities. Some of the units will have priority for households who qualify for local preference. Some of the units, like I mentioned, are built out for persons who are disabled, and those people will get priority for those units. One of the units is built out for persons who are disabled, accessible, and have hearing impairment. So if someone qualifies for both features, they would get preference. For the 2-bedroom units, the type 2 households will get preference over type 1 households. So there'll be multiple waiting lists, and everyone will be on a waiting list for a bedroom size that they applied for and were eligible for. Now, when we do the lottery drawing, and there'll be 2 drawings, I have to draw the local preference households separately. So any household who qualifies for local preference will do a drawing with just those households. And then I mix them in with everyone else, and we do a second drawing that has every single person who was in the lottery. And in both cases, I'm just drawing application numbers written down on note cards out of a box. I'll show them up on the screen, and I'll call them out as I go. Now, when I actually do the drawing, it can be a little bit anticlimactic because as you're watching, you don't know exactly what it means. And you don't know exactly what it means because you have no idea. Let's just say the very first number that's picked in a lottery is A.005. And you say, okay, what does that mean? And the answer is, well, I'm not sure yet because you don't know, and at that moment, I don't know who A.005 is. I don't know what bedroom size they've applied for. I don't know if they're a type 2 or type 1 household. I don't know if they qualify for local preference. I don't know if they have a disability. I don't know any of those things, and you don't either. So we're all just kind of, we draw it out, and we're not quite sure what it means in that moment. But the good thing is that within about an hour or 2 of the lottery, I will do all of the sorting, and I will create all of the waiting lists, and then I will send them to everyone that night. So within, I would say probably closer to 2 hours of the lottery, if you have an email, I'll send you an email. They'll be broken down with the various waiting lists, and those waiting lists will have everyone's lottery application numbers on them. So you just have to know your lottery application number, find your spot on the waiting list, and that kind of tells you when you might be moving forward. Okay, there's a question from Lori. Who manages those wait lists? So, good question. We, SEB Housing, we create the wait list, and then we, on the night of the lottery, we send them to Dolben, who's the management team, and then they manage them going forward. And they will be, let me just see if this is kind of a good segue into the next part here. I think it probably is. So this kind of, Lori and everyone else, this kind of concludes step 1, which is read the information packet. If you're interested, send in an application to SEB Housing. You'll get a lottery application number if you're eligible. We'll run the lottery. And on the night of the lottery, I will send you the waiting list with everyone's lottery application numbers. And there'll be several different waiting lists, and they'll all be kind of top to bottom in order of priority. And then we then, at that point, put you in the leasing office in touch, and we send them the waiting list. And then they will work with you in moving into step 2 in this process, which is to apply for a lease. Because remember, SEB Housing isn't the management team. We do take a look at your income and assets to make sure, to to see if it looks like you'll meet their income screening criteria, because it doesn't do you or anyone else any good to pass households along who are never going to meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria. But other than that, we're not, looking at other factors that many leasing offices look at to determine lease eligibility. Things like a Corey check to see if you have a violent criminal record that would disqualify you, or what your credit is, or your lease history. SEB housing, we're not looking at any of those things, and those are things that would be addressed in step 2. So Lori will create the waiting list from the lottery drawing. Everyone who's eligible will have a spot on a waiting list. We'll then pass you over to the leasing office, and you can work with them in step 2, which is to apply for a lease and meet their lease screening criteria. And it's important at that point that, you haven't submitted a lease application or gone through that process. So, households don't want to get too excited and say, I'm number 1 on the 2-bedroom list. I'm going to let my current landlord know right now that I'm moving out because I'm number 1 on the 2-bedroom list. I am definitely moving to Halyard. And the answer is, well, don't do that yet, because you haven't even applied for a lease yet, and you don't know if you meet the lease screening criteria. So don't give anyone any notice of anything until you at least do that much, because unfortunately, being eligible for this program does not mean that you're eligible for a lease. You may be, we just haven't determined that yet. So you want to go through that process with the leasing office before giving notice and making any firm plans. When you do move forward with them, they'll invite households, and they'll show you what the different available units are, and households can select from any of the available units on the wait lists that they're being invited from. They may invite households from all the different waiting lists at the same time. They may go kind of one by one. They may start from the 2-bedroom list, and once they've invited households on that list, then they might start going from the 1-bedroom list and then the studio. I don't know. They may not know at this point. That's probably to be decided. But households can choose from any of the available units on the list that they're invited from. And so what that means is, let's just say hypothetically that you're the number 1 household on the 2-bedroom list. Then the leasing office is going to invite you forward, and they'll show you all the 2 bedrooms. And, they'll give you ideas of when those units are going to be ready. And you can select from any of them, whether it's the unit that's available right then and there, or it's not going to be ready in a month, or it's not going to be ready in 3 months. I don't know exactly what the build out is at Halyard. Usually in big rental developments, the units are not all available at exactly the same time. Usually, they're a little bit staggered. And I don't recall exactly how staggered they are, but the leasing office can give you that information. And, the beauty of, having a higher waiting list position is you can pick the unit that works best for you in terms of, the one you like the most, but which also meets your schedule in terms of when you want to move in. And then once you reserve that unit, then the next household can select from the remaining units, and so on and so forth until all of the units are reserved. If you don't end up being able to reserve a unit through the lottery, and I think that's probably unlikely, actually. I think if you're in the lottery, you have a very, very good chance of being able to immediately move forward. So that's good. That's all the more reason to apply if you're interested. But if there are more households than there are available units, and you don't end up getting to reserve a unit through the process, you remain on the waiting list. And that means in future years, if an availability comes up, you would still be there, and they could let you know, hey, we have an availability, lottery was a year ago, but household moved out, and, are you still interested? And maybe you are, and maybe you aren't. Another thing there is that, if you're not one of the very top households on a waiting list, the households ahead of you may work out, they may not, and so you could end up getting to select a unit higher up than your actual lottery position. if a household drops out or just decides they don't want to move forward, whatever the case is, and that does happen, or they're not lease eligible, you effectively kind of rise in the ranks on a waiting list. So this is a question from Lori, starting mid to end of March for the first grouping. So you're saying that's when is that a statement? It sounds like, not a question. That's when the first units are ready. That sounds.
I can confirm that.
Yeah.
March 19th.
Okay.
They start renting units March 19th of this year.
Okay. Great. I think I probably have that information somewhere, but I don't have it right in front of me. So, there'll be a little bit of lag time between the lottery and when units are ready, but not a whole lot. That timing seems to work out pretty well. If there's, the certification that we do for the lottery is good for 6 months. So as long as you move into a unit before August 25th, there's no update or anything that's required. If you do end up selecting a unit and not moving in till, after August 25th, you may have to update your file with us, just something to keep in mind. And if you do move forward, and that's great, and we hope that, that happens for you if you're interested, you do have to recertify each year to show that you remain eligible for this program. But having gone through it before, it'll be familiar to you, and so hopefully it'll be easier. And also, the income limits go up substantially when you're recertifying as contrasted to when you're initially applying. So what that means is if you get into a unit in year one and then midway through the year you're doing excellent at work and you get a big pay raise, you could still be eligible. Specifically, and so you can make up to 140% more than what you could make when you initially applied. So just as an example, the household size of 1 right now to be eligible cannot make in excess of $67,400. But if that same household size of 1 is already living in an affordable unit and they just happen to be recertifying right now, they could make up to $94,000 and change dollars. So almost $30,000 more. So, so there's that, very nice cushion built in, where if you're in a unit, your income can go up and you can maintain eligibility for the program. I think I know I'd mentioned some about, how some of the units, you don't have to be a resident of the city to apply. Okay, I've said that, it's worth reiterating. Some of the units will have some priority for households who qualify for local preference. I don't think I actually said what local preference is, though, so let me just make that clear. Local preference applies to residents of Gloucester, households who work in the city in a business located in the city or for the city, or households who have a child going to Gloucester schools. Okay, so that's what local preference means. So I think that touches on the major points that I wanted to touch on. Again, if you need the application or the information packet, go to our website. You can download the forms right there. It seems like the people who are present are pretty familiar with the development, and so that's great. And maybe you already you've checked out their website, but looks like they have a lot of nice information on there, so you can go there too. Are there any other questions about the applying or anything that I haven't answered? And if you don't think of something now, that's okay. You can always reach out to us. If and when you do think of it, you can call us, or actually the best way to get in touch with us is email info@sebhousing.com. So if something comes up, shoot us a line and we'll get back to you. Question from Lori. For local preference, is there a length of time you have to have lived in Gloucester? No. Just if you're a resident at the time of application. is the relevant, or if that's how you're doing it, by living there. Nope, you don't have to be, nope, there's no durational requirement. So if you moved into Gloucester 2 weeks ago and that's where you live and you can show it through, you know, bills and other things, then you're all set. Any other questions?
Yes, can I apply for this?
I'm sorry, is that a question for me from the caller?
My father was asking me a question, this is Dominic.
Oh, okay.
No, you were very, very informational. It was a very good seminar. Thank you.
Oh, good. Glad you enjoyed it. All right. And anyone on the YouTube, anyone have any other questions? Again, if you don't think of something now, you can always reach out to us. All right. I don't see any. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope that you got some good nuggets of information from this, and I hope you found it helpful. And again, you know where to find us. You can always email or call us if you have questions as you begin to fill out the application. And if you're interested, get that application in early. And thanks everyone, and have a great night.